Okay, there we go. Okay, well, while Tom's going off to check, I figure I'll start the talk then. So the elective I've been given is hold up, OBS is being a bit funny. So the elective I've been given is the how and the why of prayer. Now I know that can maybe sound a bit redundant, as I assume that we're all Christian here, so to our mind we're thinking, well, obviously we pray, we're Christians, so we pray to God. Um, but I think maybe we should dig a little bit deeper into exactly why we do that. I think we may just think we have some sort of obligation, or it's just the natural thing to do. But we have many great reasons to pray, and I wanted to cover that firstly, and then the second half will be how we can go about effectively praying and structuring our prayers. So, to answer the question of why, I'm going to go to one of my favorite passages of late, which is John 15. So I'm going to read the passage and then we'll just discuss a little bit about what the passage has to say. Cool, so this is John 15. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already pruned because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, you will ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And my commandment is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business, but instead I have called you friends, for everything that I have learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. And this is my commandment: love each other. Cool, so there's a lot going on in John 15, but at 2 points in verse 7 and in verse 16, Jesus says, if you remain in me, my words remain in you, you will ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. And when I read this, because I read John 15 again quite a few months back, and I hadn't gone through John in a while, and it was so bizarre actually to see this verse, because from my end, quite a few months back in August, I went through quite a difficult ordeal, and at the end of the day, I had to come to terms with the fact that actually I can't really do anything about this horrible situation that I found myself in. I really need to take it to God in prayer. It was actually quite a enlightening, well, actually enlightening is probably not the right word, but it was just a very bizarre moment when I realized actually what I really need to be doing in the situation is praying about it, and I should have been praying about it the whole time. And it felt like a ton of bricks had just like fallen on my head when I realized actually I should have been talking to God about this all the time. So I did start speaking to him about it, about the situation, talking to him about things. But when I read John 15, verse 7, it was so immensely comforting when Jesus says, if you remain in me, my words remain in you, you will ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. So in a lot of our modern translations, it says, ask whatever you wish, it'll be done for you. I'm going to get a bit fancy here and say that actually in the Greek, it's an imperative, and what that means is it's a command. He's actually saying, if you remain in me, actually you will ask. When you remain in Jesus, the natural implication is going to be you will ask for things. And if you're remaining in him, those things will be done for you. In verse 5, he says, apart from me, when you're not in the vine, when you're not a part of the vine, you can do nothing. And actually, we would think then, okay, cool, so if we're part of the vine then we can do all the things, because, if we're not in the vine, we can do nothing. But if we're in the vine, then we can do all the things. Interesting to note is that that's not actually what Jesus said. He doesn't say, if you remain in me, you can do all the things that you want to do. He says, if you remain in me, you will ask, and it'll be done for you. Which it really takes the power out of our hands and places it in God's hands, where it belongs. The key thing is, though, that there will be an asking. There's going to be a conversation that happens between us and God. There's going to be communication that happens between us and God when we are with him. But when we're not with him, we're not walking with him, we're not including him in our lives, obviously we won't be talking with him. A big thing to highlight in John 15 is Jesus' connection with speaking and asking for things from God, and also his commandment to love. So throughout the verse, the passage, it's talking about remaining in the vine, being a part of Jesus, but it also speaks equally just as much about love. So Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. You should remain in my love. And if you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love. So he's telling you how we remain part of the vine. He's saying you need to be a part of the vine. But he's saying that in order to be a part of the vine, this is what you have to do. You have to love like I have loved you. So if you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. And then in verse 12, he says, this is my command, that you love one another. And then in verse 13, right after, he actually explains what that love looks like. Because I think we have a lot of ideas as to what love is supposed to look like. The world tells us a lot about what love is. But I think what Jesus does here is really profound. It's actually a very short verse, verse 13. But in that verse, he so effectively explains what love is at a really foundational level. So he says, greater love has no one than this. Okay, so this is like the penultimate, quintessential essence of what love is. And that is to lay one's life down for one's friends. So the ultimate expression of love is actually an ultimate expression of selflessness, not selfishness, but selflessness. So a giving up of oneself, a serving of someone else, a putting someone else's life above and beyond your own life. That's what it means to love someone. And Jesus says, you are my friends, and this is what I've commanded you to do. And obviously, right after this, he is going to, in fact, lay down his life for them, actually, for the whole world. And then again, repeating what he said earlier, whatever you ask in my Father's name, it will be done for you, assuming that you are going and bearing fruit. Because it may be easy to look at a verse like verse 7, where it says, ask whatever you wish, it'll be done for you. Obviously, if we're not asking for the right things, those things, they won't be done. James, in James 4, actually points this out very well, when he writes, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. And you do not have, because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, so that you might spend what you get on your pleasures. So, obviously, when we're asking God, and we're praying to him, there's this expectation there that what we are praying about has got to do with loving other people, because prayer and I'm trying to make the point that prayer and love are very intimately connected. So when we're praying out of love, we're not going to be praying for selfish things. We're going to be praying so that we are able to love other people, and those are the kind of prayers that God really loves to honor. Very key passage in all of this has to be verse 11, where Jesus says, so he's saying, I have told you all of this so the reason I've told you all this stuff is that so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. So Jesus knows that as humans, we have desires inside of us that need to be met. And I think he's pointing out that these desires, this longing that we have in our heart, can only really be met by his joy. And the way that we're going to obtain this joy is actually through loving other people, and the means by which we're able to really love other people is praying to God for them, for the world, by loving the world. As Jesus points out in this is in Matthew 22, the lawyers and the Pharisees came to him asking him a question, and they said to him, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus responds by saying that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is just like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And actually, then he says, on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So the entire Old Testament depends on loving God and loving other people. And the disciples, they're able to see this in the person of Jesus, which is why John writes in one of his letters later on, "Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God." And then goes on to say, "And anyone who does not love does not know God, because God actually is love." So then we have that connection of, it's not only that God loves, but God is in fact love. So we're better able to love one another when we're actually communicating and praying to the source of love itself. So that's a look at the why we as Christians are to be praying. And obviously the connection I'm making is that so we can love each other. But how can we go about praying? How can we go about talking to God in a way that honors this, in a way that he will respond positively towards us, honoring and answering our prayers, assuming we're doing it in love? So Jesus actually makes this quite clear when he gave his Sermon on the Mount in chapter 6 of Matthew. Yeah, we have an example of the Lord's Prayer. I'm sure you've heard it. So I'll read that, and then I'll just discuss some of the elements of the Lord's Prayer. So verse 5, "And when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. But truly I say to you, they have received their reward already. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who's in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Obviously, that doesn't mean that we should always be praying in private. It means that Jesus is saying a lot of people are praying so that they can be seen by others to be really holy and really pious. And he says, okay, fine, people see them to be holy and pious. They've already received their reward. But if you genuinely want to talk to my Father, go and pray to him in secret. Other people don't need to see you doing that. But if you earnestly speak to God, desiring simply to speak to God and not be seen by other people to be holy or pious or whatever, God honors that. Then he goes on to say, "And when you do pray, don't heap up empty phrases like the Gentiles do, for they think that they'll be heard because they keep speaking. But don't be like them. Your Father already knows what you need before you ask him. So pray like this." Okay, now I'm going to go through the Lord's Prayer, but I'm also just going to comment on it as we go through it. So he starts off by saying, "Our Father in heaven." So he's making that it's connection of it's our Father. It's not some distant deity. It's an intimate connection. There's our Father in heaven. Hallowed be your name, or may your name be holy. So may your name or person be honored and respected. Your kingdom come. So obviously God's kingdom is not like earthly kingdoms. God's kingdom is a kingdom of peace and of love. So when he's saying your kingdom come, he's saying, well, there's a new kingdom, not like an earthly kingdom, that's coming, and that kingdom is going to be based on love and peace. Actually, there's a beautiful passage in Isaiah 11 that says, the wolf will lie down, will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling, they'll be together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, the ox will eat straw like an ox, and the infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So that's like a little glimpse into the future of what God's kingdom is going to be like. So Jesus is saying you need to pray that kingdom of peace and goodwill and righteousness and love, comes to earth. He then says that your will be done. So important to note, not our will, but he's saying may God's will be done. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for us to do is it's conforming our will, our desires, to God's desires. But once we realize and we come to terms with the fact that actually God's will for us is far better than what our will may be. I'll give a silly example and say that, look, when you're really young, you think it'll be a fantastic idea to have ice cream for dinner every day. And yeah, fine, maybe ice cream for dinner once is not going to kill you, but you soon learn when you grow up. Obviously, your parents don't give you ice cream for dinner, even though you really want it. And they don't do that because they don't like you, they don't love you. They do it. They especially don't give you ice cream for dinner every night because they do love you and they don't want you to die early from early onset diabetes. If you eat ice cream for dinner every day, you're going to be incredibly unhealthy. So despite the fact that you may want it, your parents say no. And I think this is much the same with God. We must understand that his desires for us and his will for us goes beyond our immediate understanding of the situation. So we need to be conforming our will to God's will. That's why Jesus is saying that his will be done. His is a good will. Sometimes we need to put our will on the back burner and we need to be desiring God's will to be done. So may your will be done on earth as it is done in heaven. And then he goes on to say, give us this day our daily bread. Quite an interesting comment that Tom made on this. I was discussing this passage with him a few months ago. And he told me, yeah, it's actually really interesting. God's saying, give us this day our daily bread. Not, it could have been a lot more efficient if Jesus had said, well, give us this day our week's bread, or give us a month's supply, or a year's supply, or a whole decade worth of bread. But he doesn't say that. He says, give us our daily bread. And later on, actually, in the same chapter, he'll be saying that, tomorrow can worry about itself. But we don't live in tomorrow, we live in the now. And sometimes I think we worry way too much about what the future holds, that we forget that we actually live in the present. We don't live in the future. We actually will never live in the future. When the future comes, it will be the present. So we are constantly, forever living in the now. And this is the time that we need to actually be worrying about. This is the time that we need to be concerned with, not having our heads stuck either in the past or in the future. So Jesus is saying, when you're communicating with God, communicate in the now. You live in the now. You have needs now. You need to be loving people now, not later in the future. It starts right now, actually. And there are plenty of passages in the Old Testament that say, look, you can store up food, but you might die or it might be burnt up. So let tomorrow worry about tomorrow. And then he says to forgive us our debts. So we're asking God for forgiveness. Obviously, there are plenty of things that we need forgiveness for. We're sinful, fallen human beings that make mistakes. So we need to be asking God for that forgiveness. And then it goes on, he takes it a step further and says, as we also have forgiven our debtors or our trespassers. Great example that Jesus gives about that at another point. He tells the parable of the unforgiving servant. The servant is brought before the king, and he owes the king multiple lifetimes worth of debt. And the king, out of kindness, forgives all of it, which is incredible. And immediately the servant goes out, finds another servant who owes him like a month's wages, and demands it of him and has him thrown in jail. And of course, the unforgiving servant is then brought back before the king, and the king says, well, okay, you have forgiven everything, but you won't forgive a tiny amount, so I am now not forgiving your debt, and you are going to jail. It's much easier for us to start engaging with and forgiving the people that do wrongs to us when we realize how much we have been forgiven. So that's quite a key verse there that Jesus gives us. And then lastly, he says, and then do not lead us into temptation, deliver us from evil. So God isn't the one tempting us. Obviously, we go through temptations constantly. Every day we're confronted with something where we have a choice to make. So it's not God the one tempting us, but I know that from personal experience, He does allow things to come into our lives to try us to kind of put us into the furnace, into the crucible, where yes, it's really hot, it's really uncomfortable, it can be really painful at times, but that is done in order to burn off impurities within us and refine us as human beings. Oftentimes we're refined the most, we grow the most through adversity, which, yeah, it's not that great when you're in it, but I look at the difficulties that I went through many months ago, and from the vantage point where I'm at now, months later, I'm actually grateful for the difficulties that I went through, because it's done a lot of good in my own heart. It's allowed me to come to terms with things I didn't really understand before, and it's definitely allowed me to be closer to God. So yeah, that's I would say why God brings certain things into our lives. But Jesus is saying, look, those things may come into your lives, but our response is to God, deliver us from this evil. We can rely on Him to sustain us through those times. And it's quite telling that Jesus, He, throughout His ministry here on earth, it's constantly the Gospels are saying, and He went off and He prayed. And it's a bit weird, Jesus being God, going off constantly praying. You think, well, God doesn't have any need to pray, but clearly, even God Himself wishes to communicate with God. Especially, you can see in the Garden of Gethsemane, He's sweating blood, He is stressed, but His response to the impending death, His trial and His death, was to go to God in prayer for strength, for sustenance, because God is His peace and His love, and His mission here on earth was to love. And clearly there's this connection between praying to God and being able to love. So that's my explanation, my dive into how we should go about praying. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts at this point. It'd be great if we could have a bit of discussion, if I can hear what you're thinking.
Hey, buddy, that was just nice how you explained the Our Father prayer.
I appreciate
That's
that.
really
Thank you.
one thing I like.
Yeah, so it's obviously the Lord's Prayer isn't, Jesus isn't saying, well, every prayer should look exactly like that. But it's definitely a useful template as to how we should be structuring our prayers, because there's essentially, when I look at that prayer, there's nothing, it doesn't look quite like my normal prayer. Sometimes if I go to God in prayer, it's just like a bucket list or a shopping list of things. But when I look at the Lord's Prayer, I see a prayer that's deeply other-centered. It's got to do with God and His kingdom, and with loving other people, and with supplying just our daily needs, and asking for forgiveness for ourselves, and asking for love to be able to forgive others. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I suppose, to how we would normally think about prayer. But I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is Danica so quiet? Hello?
Because I have nothing to say.
Yeah.
Did you at least find it helpful?
Yes.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, just as like a parting note, I suppose, just a little bit of application. I've learned now to basically, start my days with, it doesn't have to be a long prayer. I sometimes will pray for quite a while, just because the more you pray to God, it's, I suppose, the easier it gets and the more enjoyable it becomes when you know you're talking with Him and that He hears you. But just starting your day with like a quick 2-minute prayer just after you wake up as the first thing that you do in the day can be really powerful, can be really uplifting, and can put you into a really good good space to be loving other people, to be caring for other people when you start your day like that. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That was nice.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Really enjoyed it. Sharp.
Ciao. Yeah, done. Cool, are you done?
No, I'm just listening to the